There we are. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Briar Harvey. This is the Neurodiversity Media Network. Today, I am back with the incredible Faith Clarke, and we are talking about work culture design. So, this is, I believe, the third part of this series. If you missed the first two, you can find them on neurodiversitymedianetwork.com. I'll link them in the show notes. And today, I'm truly excited about this conversation. Could this meeting have been an email? So, one of the things that is most true about work is that many people, especially many neurodivergent people, do not work well synchronously.
Mm-hmm.
We are better taking time, developing our thoughts, being able to go, no, that's not actually what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say was this instead.
Right.
And meetings are, I think, for a lot of neurodivergent folks, one of the biggest struggles of being in a workplace, right? Because it's intense. There's all these people at a table and they look at me when I am talking and I can't interrupt and I have to properly maintain eye contact. And there are all these social rules. Jesus, I'm getting anxious
Just
just
talking about it.
talking about it. So, in a corporate environment, then, one of the biggest problems is how many meetings there are and how to determine whether or not we need to have a meeting, whether it could be a different form of communication truly seems to be a struggle. And to lead into that, I've noticed several companies who were primarily asynchronous this year have gone back and said, well, actually, this does need to be a meeting.
Right.
But when they do that, they have so much better structure around it. They've really been able to internalize that, oh, this needs to be a meeting because we need to talk about XYZ thing. And that should take XYZ minutes, and then we can be done. So, first of all, we determine what should and should not be a meeting?
Right. So I think that, I'm big in the reframing conversation, right? And so when we say the word meeting, certain things are the connotations are clear. The table, the sitting, the looking at you, the not interrupting, whatever the professional approach is, and so on. Um, and I think that when we're talking about culture design, we are saying that we're going to design a culture that reduces barriers to contribution and that helps people feel like they can contribute, belong, and thrive. If we're designing a work culture that does that, then the question we have to ask is, well, how do we do that? And the ways that we get work done are either on our own or in meetings. Those are if we're going to be super binary, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so both the on our own and in meetings need to both accomplish the work in ways that help people feel like they belong and can thrive, and in ways that reduce the barriers to contribution for all the people that we're choosing to include anyway. Because we do need to be honest and say that some people, we are not including some people. Let's not just say come one, come all, and then we have work experiences, meetings, and other aspects of work that do not honor who this person is and feel harmful and extractive for that person. In which case, we can't include them, or we don't want to. We're going to split hairs. We're not going to do that, right? So if we're choosing to include all the people who are in the team right now, and we've been intentional about stating what kind of culture will help everyone feel that we can thrive and belong, then the meeting is a place to live that out. That's like me at my dinner table. Like if I say I'm going to be this kind of parent, then the meeting is the place where I show that. So I think that that's kind of has to be the first premise, and that's different from what many of us have inherited, like meeting structures. You have the quarterly whatever, and you have the offsite whatever, and I think that there's an opportunity to ask the question, like you said, which things need us to be together in the same time, and of course there's a question of in the same place, and then which
Mm-hmm.
things don't. And once we've answered that question, then how do we be together in the same time in a way that maintains or cultivates the culture we want while getting the job done? And we've not had a ton of practice doing that. So
That's correct.
for all of us, like we'll if you go into a meeting that you hate, at least you know what to expect. You're just gonna struggle through, and we're going to, be silent. We're not going to interrupt the boss or whatever we're going to do. And then we're going to leave and say, thank goodness that was over and I can actually get to some of my work. If we're deciding that we're going to redesign our culture so that people can thrive, then we need to be prepared for the discomfort of doing something we haven't done before. And we know our brains are going to try to do the things we've always done, even if we don't like them. Like I'm gonna do the anxious spin that I know I hate, but the kind of 30 minutes of exercise every day that's gonna reset my physiology, and now I'm not gonna do that. So some of the resistance, and we have to own this when we're going to do revolutionary work, which is what culture design is that we're gonna feel uncomfortable. We're doing stuff we haven't done before. um and so in within that, all of that context, and how do we decide which things should be done with the meeting, the things that must be done at the same time, and how do we do that in the ways that honor the culture that we've defined. And that means that we're stepping out of a culture where the meeting structure was told to us, and we're
Mm-hmm.
stepping into a culture where we're saying we're co-creating a culture where everybody can thrive. Now, we're not aligned with this idea, the supremacist idea that there is a person that knows what everybody needs, right? The boss or whoever. How am I going to know what you need in a meeting, Brian? Well, I do need to kind of listen to you. Like you would also need to sign on. We would all need to sign on together to be the co-creators of this meeting, and to be in the mix of how would we have a meeting about this thing in a way that feels good to us. And we won't know that on the outside. We're going to have to say, okay, I think it means, like you said, in your context, um, very well structured. We don't go over time. Whatever you say, it means. And then you're going to try it, and then you are going to resist, and the boss is going to resist, and everybody else is going to resist. I even hate the word boss, but you know what I mean. Everybody's going to resist the temptation to, when it feels like it's not working, to check out, but instead say, hey, remember you were talking last time about reflection and that the debriefing meetings are the favorite kind. I am an advocate for debriefing in the meeting. Where is my face? Okay. I'm an advocate for debriefing in the meeting. So as the meeting is happening, then we have a chance to say, hey, this is one of those moments. We don't have to talk about it now. I'd love us to spend some time talking about this, because we said we designed this meeting to be a particular way. And right now I'm feeling XYZ, or I too much noise. I have a friend who, the sensory stuff, she's in a meeting where most of the people talk over each other, and I'm from a family of people who talk over each other, and we enjoy it, and it's easy for us to keep track of the threads. She gets overwhelmed. It's like, no, I cannot, right? And does not feel comfortable saying, but then she gets angry with them and say, you people are not. So she doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't have language, there is no kind of shared agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So the meeting is just not constructed in a way that works for her. So there has to be an opportunity to reflect in the meeting, on the meeting, as well as to have time, whether it's after or whatever, to say, okay, how did we do that? And I liken it like rehearsals versus performance. I liken it like I love what happens in sports teams. I don't love what happens in sports teams, but for this particular example, where you go play the game and then you have the post mortem, you come back and you watch the video, and you say that thing that happened between here and here, stop the video. How do we do that again? And I think there's this more active engagement in culture co creation through meetings, which is when we're getting together, that allows us to all wrestle with, okay, how did we do this? How do we want to do this? What would work better? And that assumes that people have voice and decision making power and all the good stuff.
Additionally, there is something to that. Like, I almost always record my meetings. At this
Mhm.
point in time, most of my work is online. I can record the meeting. I can then transcribe the meeting.
Right.
So there's all these touch points for me in a physical meeting room. That almost never happens. So when we say review, I can see why that has to happen in that moment directly, because if there isn't an instant replay for me to go back and watch over again, I'm not going to be able to say, hey, that was a bad call.
And there needs to be, as an aspect of the culture we're designing, something that says that pause that you do isn't interrupting. That pause that you do is in service of the culture we're trying to design. And and agreements around how we do that, right? Because you're right, in the live, by the time we finish the meeting, so much has happened for so many of us that to go back through to rehash this moment, I felt this way or whatever, you know, it doesn't work. And so, and not every moment needs to be rehashed, but the opportunity to just say this is an example of that time, or even ask a question. um I've been in meetings, for example, where somebody said, Faith, it feels like you're moving too quickly to solving the problem. And I'm like, just saying that to me gives me some information that people are in a different place in their whatever thought process about this. And that I am switching into, I call it my D. If I use a DISC profile, sometimes I use different personality assessments too. So in a DISC profile, especially under pressure, I'm a high D. High T, D are fast task people. So I'm like, oh, I'm switching into my D. I need to switch back to I because these people are not at the problem solving stage yet. That's information for me. So I don't, and then they have to know because I've also been accused. You just want things to go your way. You just like to take control. And all these kinds of things because they're also, not necessarily interpreting the things that are happening in the way based on their understanding of me. So I have to be willing to disclose, which I have in many meetings. Like, when I feel like time gets tight, I do switch into a high task place. And so just let me know if you are, and we have these conversations right then and there. And then I'm like, okay. And so even one a client I was working with, and I was like, so what do you think we should do about it? He says, I'm not there yet. I said, okay. And I just started reflecting and that kind of thing. So having agreements around this reflection in the meeting, I think is very important. And then, people say to me, business owners often say to me, but that makes the meeting too long. I was with a client and one of the people in the meeting says, if we did that every time, we would get none of this stuff done. And so then we'll go back to this question, what stuff done? Because
Right.
some of the stuff that they have on the agenda was actually just retelling. This was like, I went to X place, spoke to this person for 20 minutes. We did this, that, checklist, things off list, which honest to goodness, we don't really need synchronous time. What we need synchronous time for is the co-regulating, interacting in ways that don't feel harmful and that actually feel nourishing, and practicing what we preach and figuring out how to be with each other in ways that level up the work, be with each other in ways that listen for the barriers and get rid of them.
Yeah, because the reality of synchronous work is that only the work that actually needs to be done together should
Yeah.
be planned for synchronous work. And I think that we truly often don't understand which is which. So, how do I define what synchronous work is?
I'm really one of those people that says for every question, it depends. So
I
it
know.
is work.
I know. It's
It,
like the theme song of the Neurodiversity Media Network. Briar asks a question, and the answer is, well, Briar, it depends. I know it depends.
there's
And
7 billion people, but it's so here's what it depends on though. If there's 7 people on the team and the 7 people agree that this thing needs to be done together, then it needs synchronous work. And for some people, like you just talk about, co-working, that's solo and yet synchronous because we're doing it at the same time and taking up the same physical space. So there is this thing of what does the team need to meet about? That's really the question. That's the thing that needs to be synchronous. And then the team has to have a sense of what's the collective goal and all the good stuff. And then within the space where there are differences, then we're processing, well, what does synchronous look like so that we can get to that intersection that fits most people? What are the supports that are needed? What are the accessibility gaps? So when I say accessibility gaps, I'm not just talking about transcription. I'm just talking about the space between where the system ends and the person's capacity ends, that space, whatever that is. Therapy ball to bounce in the meeting, ability to pace, or whatever it, headphones. And I'm not saying that everyone needs support, but I am saying that the synchronous meeting needs to fit the people, whether by majority or providing support. Did
so,
I, is that where we got? Yeah.
yeah, and you answered it, but the follow-up question is, what happens, Faith, when you and I don't agree on whether the work needs to be synchronous? In my life, almost no work needs to be synchronous, but I certainly know people who benefit from the ability to bounce things off of a coworker, whereas I would rather process those things individually and then come back to you with my reply. So, how do we bridge that gap?
In a collective space, we are either both giving and receiving, or just giving or just receiving. So the question becomes, do any of those tasks need all of us? And are we in the meeting for any either of those? So if you can do your work on your own, I've often been in meetings where I'm like, I'm gonna make some notes for myself, and I'm gonna do this when I leave. But I also have a contribution that I've agreed to. I know that Faith needs, Briar doesn't need this, but Briar needs to have her voice reflected back. And I'm a good reflector. So I'm holding the collective. The work isn't just a task that I'm checking off on my list. The work is the shared work that we have to put on this event or make the next
Ooh.
million or whatever it is
Mhm.
that I have signed up for this shared work. Some of that shared work is things I'm going to do on my own. And then some of it is the contribution I need to give into the space so that the shared work happens easily. And some of it is contributions that need to come to me. And so when I'm in meetings, I tend to be listening for myself, but I'm also listening for what other people need so that I can make that available, tossing it into the pot. I think so back to your question, to be more specific, if you don't feel you have anything to give, you have nothing to receive from the meeting, then that's a conversation that needs to be had patiently and slowly. Because I actually don't believe that there are two ideas. Where's my camera? Two ideas that seem disconnected have a connection somehow. I do honestly believe that's like a philosophical frame for me. So it just means let's find it. And it might be, and after we've done a bit of like and explored, we might find, oh, the two ideas have some foundational piece that we both agree on, in which case that becomes the shared work for that meeting. Like,
Mhm.
so we shouldn't be in the meeting for like I can't code. If I back in the day when I was coding, I can't code with other people around. I couldn't do. I could get feedback on code and I could give feedback on code and I could review executing code, but I couldn't code. So when I saw, oh, this is a problem, I have to make a note, and then I'm going to take that into my corner, and then I'm going to do the work on it. So if people are forcing me to type code while they watched, that wouldn't work.
Okay. So a lot of this then is boundary driven. It's about being aware of what my needs are and what your needs are, and having clearly stated boundaries around how we meet those needs.
Yeah, and when I think about boundaries, I think about like the cell membrane type of analogy. A boundary is the thing that makes me me and separates me from you, but it's also the membrane that our stuff crosses through. So it also defines our interaction with each other based on who I am, who you are. Then there is this way that we are together, and both of us are nourishing the boundaries, right? Both of us are kind of honoring that boundary. It's not just people will say, well, you need to say what you need. And I'm like, yes, I do need to say what I need, but I also need to be in a space where people are interrogating for what I need. And I need to be curious about what other people need. Like, this is just a part of the thing. It's not like people who have special needs need to say what their needs are. No, actually, we all have needs to be supported, and we all are support. So we're all interrogating what the support needs are, and we're all kind of receiving support. And that's how we're kind of nourishing the boundary between us.
One of the things you and I have spoken about a lot in this regard is safety.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true here. In order for me to state what I need, I have to feel safe that
Right,
you are going to be receptive to that need.
right.
So, when we are creating this culture of determining where the boundaries are, how do we demonstrate the safety needs?
That depends. It's that's part of the agreement that we come up with, whether explicitly or implicitly, whether it's a social contract or it's written out. Those are the agreements that we came up with when we said this is a culture we're defining.
Hmm.
Like, if I say this is a culture I'm defining, then I am opening it up for you to call me on my infractions of the culture, and vice versa, and in ways that honor the culture. So if I've said, and I use my kids for this a lot because they're safe examples, but if I've said, come to me and talk to me about blah blah blah, whatever it is, and then they come to me and they talk to me and I blow up, and then they come to me and said, mommy, when I came to you and I said so and so, I felt all kind of ways when you spoke back to me. That is their right, because this is the agreement that we've had. And then my response needs to be something along the lines of, shucks, I broke the agreement that we had. I'm really sorry about that. And then whatever other thing that I'm saying about whatever it was that's, I responded to. So I think that the safety has to be defined within the culture. How do we help each other remain safe? And within the safety definitions, some people call them community agreements. I just think, like, yeah, this is just what we've said we're going to be with each other. Have to be, when things are broken, what does that mean, and how do we handle that? So how do I speak up about that? And what kind of support do individuals need to be able to hear when they are the ones that have done harm? I'm with another client talking through things like acknowledging that we all have done harm and we all have been harmed. So using the frame shifting to say, what would I have wanted when I was harmed? And then that's who I want to be when somebody comes to me and says they have been harmed, or they feel harm because of something that has happened. And then having just some clear conversations about that when it shows up. And it may not be possible to have that in the moment. Like, we're having an event, there's a launch going on. We're in the middle of, like a big concert, and people are heading onto stage. You said bad things to me and I felt really offended. That's not the time for the debrief and the processing and the reflection and all the things. We're just going to, like,
Right.
stay with the big goal, head the thing on, knowing that we have these agreements between us. So we're going to come back to it. And whether I send you an email and say, could we talk on Monday? Or I say to you in the moment, um, Can we 15 minutes afterwards? Let's. I just wanted to say something really quick. That feels really important.
And I can see how those kinds of actions are going to feel deeply uncomfortable to people who are conflict avoidant. And I think that's probably part of the reason they don't like the meetings in the first place, because they are conflict avoidant. So, what do we do when speaking up for ourselves isn't our natural inclination?
Um, I am a big fan of encouraging. I don't want to use the word healthy, but it's like healthy self-expression is what I wanted to say. But so and I think the environment needs to be conducive to healthy self-expression. So having that modeled for with people who are comfortable speaking up for themselves feels really important. But also as a team, if I'm the team leader and I see people who don't speak up in meetings, I want to set the tone for the conversations outside of the meeting about that. I want to give as many opportunities. If it's a Voxer note or audio or Marco Polo, so I'm gonna like make it clear that we're talking about this now, but we can talk about it at any time too. You can text me about it, send me a note. If you don't text me or send me a note, I'm gonna go out. People tend to say, as like my example of this in my own life and practice, is that I break the rule of I only communicate with clients by X means. I break that rule all the time. I communicate with people the way they communicate. I don't know sign language, so I don't do that. But if I see Briar on Facebook and I don't see Briar in Voxer, I'm gonna reach out to Briar on Facebook. I'm gonna text the other person. So I take it as my responsibility to really hear everyone when I am in the team leading role. And so when people aren't speaking in the meeting, I'm going to over communicate my willingness to hear. And I hope that that invites people into more sharing in the meeting. I also think I saw this, I think it's John, what was his name? John, oh, the scholar, I've forgotten his name. But he has a rule in his meetings that people who consider themselves to be privileged, and they have really clear definitions of privilege, because he's a black man, so he's not even talking about race, but just freedom of expression. I consider myself to have the privilege of being able to talk about uncomfortable things easily. People who understand their privilege give space for people who may not have that privilege, and whatever that way is. So he actually in his meetings he says that at the very beginning of the meetings, and deliberately does not say anything after, when the floor is open for people to contribute. Then he's waiting to make it clear that the chatty person doesn't just take the thing over. And I'm not saying that everybody should do that, but I am saying that as the leader, you hold the responsibility of making sure the space feels, um, people feel like it's easy to contribute to the conversation
Mm.
and speak up for themselves. And if they don't, seek them out and figure out how they need that done in whatever way that you can get that from them.
So, the leadership around meetings isn't just about the ability to conduct the meeting, although that is definitely a thing. It's also about holding the space for consensus to be achieved as to whether or not there should be a meeting in the first place. And I think that this presents a challenge for leaders
Mhm.
because it is, I don't want to say it takes away authority, but that is exactly what it does. So, how does a leader assume leadership while also simultaneously passing out responsibility?
I think there's a great opportunity here to redefine leadership, reframe it. We have to again own our history of leaders being the people who know and who tell us what to do. There is an entire legacy of whether it's colonialism or other supremacist structures that say only the few know, and they tell us, and we do it. So as a leader, I have to detox that in myself. I want to have voice and I want to trust my wisdom. That means I want to also give space for people to have voice and trust their wisdom. That's the part of the deal, you know. So part of the conversation that I think we all need to be having is how do we become more inclusive, and then how do we build inclusive organizations. And so that's like, I think once you start to do some of that work, then you can be and be transparent. I think our teams are so like forgiving. Just be transparent with this thing that, you know what, I'm coming from a system that blah blah blah, so I need your help to blah blah blah. I think I may speak over whatever it is. Let me know. And then it becomes this, the elephant in the room is on, like, oh, there we are, elephant. And then we can kind of be with it versus let's all pretend that we're not, you know, that thing. So
Well,
that's kind of
I think there's something to that, that the aspects of leadership that are valuable here are not what we traditionally think of as leadership. And for a lot of people, there's gonna be some unpacking to do there.
right. Yep. I mean, like we breathe the same air. Like this is I remember when I confronted my racism. Like I breathe the same air, I drink the same water. So anti-black racism is a part of what I've taken in, which means that I have racist thoughts. When you own that you've been a part of a supremacist structure, you've been so looking forward. That was the thing with parenting. I've been so looking forward to being able to tell some people what to do. It's like to be the people who know the things and tell somebody what to do because I've been the person who's not known or who's not been qualified to say I know. When we start
Well,
to unpack a lot of these structures and where that comes from, and then figure out, well, what would the way be that we would, you know, would be, that's internal work, and that's our human work, and then we bring that into the spaces we are, relationships, partnerships, business, etc. I have one last thing, Briar, to say about meetings, and
yes.
then I might have to wrap this up. I think the other thing that we also want to do, and as especially in our small business space where everybody has no time and other things, we're very tempted to have very few meetings, one, and then to pack all the things into the meeting. So
Right.
I am a fan. I am a fan of having different types of meetings and letting that be. Like, in other words, um, if we're just debriefing the event, let's just do that. If something strategic tries to sneak in, let's make a note of it and put that in the strategic meeting. If we're just planning our weekly operations, let's do that. Of course, with the caveat that we're going to allow ourselves to reflect and give feedback and all the things that we just talked about earlier. But one of the an author I read said having strategic thoughts, debriefing, operational details, relationship conversations, and training in the same meeting is like watching a documentary that's a drama with some comedy and news rolled in. Yeah, it's like, so part of this thing has to be about being willing to give space for the different things that are needed versus because they're uncomfortable and we don't want to figure out how to do them in ways that are nourishing, we try to pack it all in to the one thing
Hmm.
and then nothing happens. So I'm like, let's plan these meetings out, define what they are, and in the defining what they are, help people to be ready for the meeting by saying, hey, this is this type of meeting, so this is what you need to come to the meeting with, and this are the expectations. We're gonna, you know, the agenda is not set for certain types of meetings. I think the agenda should not be set. I think people should come together and then say, take the first 2 minutes to say, this is what I'm bringing to the table, these are things I want to talk about, and the agenda is then set. But for another type of meeting, you might want to say, we have these two, three strategic topics that we want to talk about. Research them, come with, a bunch of different points of views. We're going to spend whatever it is. But there's a responsibility to separate and then be clear on how people can prepare, as well as be clear on how we're supporting people's contributions in the meeting.
Well, all of this comes down to managing expectations. Truly, I have to know what the expectations are of me in this time and in this place. And if you've given that to me, then I should be able to come to the table and sit down and have a conversation that is productive. So, I think the clearer we are about understanding what those expectations are, who they're for, and what they need to be defined as for this time, the easier it is for us to really create that.
Yeah, and I think owning the fact that we have a history of unmet expectations, or maybe
Hmm.
harm, the thing we expected was not the thing that happened, then when we have difficulty, even when expectations are clear, we want to be really gentle and patient with each other as we explore what's going on underneath there. Because the whole thing about redesigning culture is about healing, not just work, but our relationship to work and healing ourselves. And healing journeys take time. So I might want to be with you to say, yeah, I that was horrible, that thing that happened, or I'm responding out to something that happened to me, and that was, and I apologize for, bringing that past thing into this present moment. But we all do. So
Definitely. So I think next time we wanted to talk about the ways that we create connections to the organization. Tell us a little bit
yeah,
more about that.
I think that when I say connections, I'm thinking more about the the ways that we experience the culture of the organization by connecting with each other,
Mhm.
in meetings and outside, connecting to the mission, as well as being part of the shaping of the organization. So especially when big conflicts, big projects, big things come up, I think there are opportunities for us to really shift how work has been done by figuring out, how are we doing shared decision making? How are we
Mm,
handling big conflicts? How are we creating space for just human to human connection? Because we know that when people are connected to each other, the vibe actually gets work done. If
mhm.
if we feel like we belong with each other, even when we're working apart, we know we've shared this particular thing, this particular goal, or whatever it is. That creates a whole different vibe than if we can't get along. Even if we're working separately, creating space for people to figure out the getting along part is, I think, part of what we need to be doing as well.
Well, and this comes after the meeting because the meeting is the temperature check. If the meetings aren't working, then our connection to the culture is probably got problems. Meetings work well when the culture is healthy and productive. So I think that's a great place to go next. I'm really looking forward to it. Faith, thank you.
You are
Y'all,
welcome.
this is what we're doing here. We're having conversations about changing the world and building better things, and that takes time. It takes some effort to really go down and unpack these pieces. But at the end of the day, we believe that there's real value in having these kinds of conversations and learning these things in a way that allows us to take them out into the world. So if you would like to support our work here, you can find us at the neurodiversitymedianetwork.com. Paid subscribers get access to a couple of different private streams, and we've got a bunch of things coming up in the works over the next several months that should be really exciting for people. Please join us and help us do this work. Next time, creating a community, and it's going to be great.
We're
All
going to
right,
talk about
y'all.
the hard
Have an amazing day, and we'll see you in 2